What it do, citizens of P-Town, and welcome to this video. You know what this video is. This is none other than a video about me changing my opinions on movies, or seeing if I change my opinion on certain movies after rewatches. If you've been a fan of the channel long enough, then you know that a few years ago I actually did this video before where I talked about um, movies like Raging Bull or The Big Lebowski, in which I was kind of lukewarm to them at first, but it wasn't until subsequent rewatches of those two movies, for example, that my reception towards those films grew in esteem to large extents. And so at the end of that video, I actually set up I wanted to try it again and make a video about it. And I kind of preface that okay, some of those movies might have been Kingdom of the Crystal Skull or Paprika or Rear Window, for example. And so almost 2 years later, I finally found the time to rewatch at least 10 movies that I might have been lukewarm about it first. And I'm here to tell you if I like those movies more upon the second rewatch or not. So yeah, pretty interesting video and a pretty fun one. People change their opinions all the time for random things. Whether or not it's food or music or stances on the world, opinions can change, and I think movies are an interesting investment for time. But nonetheless, let's just jump right into it. Starting off at number one, we have none other than a movie from one of my favorite directors of all time, one of the few misses in his filmography, in my opinion, and that was Tenet. And here's the thing: my whole reception to this movie, you already know what it is. If you've seen my Christopher Nolan ranked video, you know how I feel about this movie verbatim and how I felt about it in terms of rewatches, or I guess after a rewatch. And my opinion on that movie had not changed. So once again, I say this all in my Christopher Nolan ranked video. So if you haven't seen it, go check that out because I talk about my one of my favorite directors as well as my opinion on this movie. But just to sum it up without repeating it exactly or repeating everything that I said in that video. But when I first watched it, I found its script to be a little bit too convoluted and a little bit too confusing to really enjoy the payoffs. But I appreciate the set pieces. And when rewatching it and hopefully giving myself another opportunity to grasp more of the narrative, I found that I admired its creativity and its practicalness, or I guess its creativity and its set pieces to be more appreciated. But then its story, I found even less to appreciate about because it's still very confusing. I did on rewatch, I did find and notice that the heart of the movie was kind of the domestic abusive relationship between some of the characters. I found the heart. Once again, not really much substance at the end of the day, and so that's just a brief way to put it. If you've seen my Christopher Nolan ring video, you know how I feel. But otherwise, upon my second rewatch, didn't really change my opinion that much. I like some parts more, some parts less, but overall, it was an equal experience. Another movie that I prefaced that I want to try to rewatch to see if I would enjoy it more was Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. So that first changing opinions video was released mid 2022. By that point, I don't recall if Dial of Destiny was announced yet. It definitely was. No, yeah, it was probably just done filming. So I probably knew about Dial of Destiny. And it's interesting because I had actually waited, or not waited, but by the time I rewatched Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, it had been after I watched Dial of Destiny for the first time. And interesting enough, I think after seeing Dial of Destiny, which this video isn't a review for the movie, but didn't really enjoy that much. I liked it, but not memorable at all. But because of just how even more lukewarm I was towards Dial of Destiny, when I went ahead and rewatched Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, I actually liked it a little bit more. I'm definitely a bigger fan of this movie now, and I'm not gonna try to quantify just how much more I like a movie throughout this video. There's no really grading system, but I can say that I did enjoy it more, and simply because I enjoyed the set pieces. I think in Dial of Destiny it has one good set piece, and that was the beginning with the train sequence, and then the rest of the set pieces in the movie are pretty much exclusively car chases. There is something interesting going on in the climax, which I won't get into because for time's sake. As far as spoilers for this video, I'm not really going to spoil too much. I'll usually preface it, but nothing too big. But point is, Dial of Destiny, not really interesting in terms of its set pieces or its ideas. And when you come in with Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, it did have a lot of ideas and a decent amount of misses, but still had more than Dial of Destiny. And I think if not for Dial of Destiny, I probably wouldn't have enjoyed Crystal Skull more, because then I love all the set pieces in that movie. There's the beginning with, in the warehouse, and it's very, very fun, and it has a fun play on Indiana Jones's growing age. The banter with Marion throughout the movie. I mean, I'm going to talk about Crystal Skull. I'm not going to talk about Dial of Destiny. But the banter with Marion and Indy was very, very fun and wholesome. There's the whole fun scene in the sand pit in which, for one, when Marion reveals that Shia LaBeouf's character is Indy's son, and then they have to pull him out with a snake, and then there's the whole set piece in the jungle with the really fun cars set piece, and then it goes into the I guess the ants, right? And then the waterfalls. It's just really, really ongoing. I really appreciate the set piece a lot more in Crystal Skull, and so because of that, I like it more now. So that was a really long way of me saying that I like it more because of Dial of Destiny. But no matter, there's that. So the next movie, the third movie on this list, is In the Mood for Love, considered one of the greatest romance movies of all time, just one of the greatest movies ever made, directed by none other than the legendary Wong Kar-wai. And so when I first watched this movie, I enjoyed the talent on screen and off screen. I I don't need to tell you that Tony Leung and Maggie Chung are amazing at their jobs, and same with Wong Kar-wai and the style and the music and the cinematography, all that. But I didn't really get much payoff from the movie. I thought it was a good movie, but nothing great, nowhere near one of my favorite romance movies of all time. And upon rewatching it, my opinion has not changed. I think it's the same. I think it's just a good movie, but not great. It's interesting because on one hand, I felt like some scenes felt more intimate the second time around. For example, there's a scene where these two characters, they get together, they realize that their spouses are committing adultery, and they're kind of practicing, they're kind of living out their lives and putting themselves in their spouse's shoes. And so, for example, that one dinner scene where Tony Leung's character kind of gives Maggie Chung's character, some sauce to use for a steak, and just kind of watching her use that sauce just like Tony Leung's character's wife does, that felt a lot more intimate the second time around. I'm just like, oh, okay, I kind of see what Wong Kar Wai's cooking here. Or the scene where they're rehearsing, it just felt like a bigger gut punch when they're practicing confronting their partners. Things like that, I felt stronger the second time around, but not that much more. And I really honestly can't say the same about the entire movie. It is an unpopular opinion of mine that I think In the Mood for Love is just a good movie, but sadly, I just am not enthusiastic about this movie as other people. And I don't know what it is. Maybe it's the source material. I feel like I do enjoy Fallen Angels by War Kong Wai, so it's not like the style that I just am not getting it. It's just specifically maybe the source material for In the Mood for Love. So yeah, a little disappointed to say that, but nonetheless, it's an honest opinion. Next up, we have so the fourth movie. This is a film from one of the most influential and greatest filmmakers of all time, and that was none other than Doctor Strangelove, directed by the late and great Stanley Kubrick. Stanley Kubrick and I haven't had the best relationship. Point is, I don't really enjoy many of his movies. I think his movies are decent, they're good, but none of them that I've seen are anywhere near my favorites of all time within the genre. While I do respect movies like The Shining and 2001: A Space Odyssey, if you ask me what my favorite sci-fi movies are or what my favorite horror movies are, I would never consider uh, either of those respectively. And Doctor Strangelove, I felt like was one of those movies that maybe I could have enjoyed more the second time around because of its satire. And with me being a fan of the Coen brothers and enjoying their offbeat, off-kilter humor, I thought that maybe with the first time watching Doctor Strangelove, I thought it was pretty boring. I thought the humor didn't really land. Maybe it's just been a while since I taken my last history class. I wasn't understanding the satire that was happening. But I felt like it was possible because of I was a fan of the Coen brothers and I had enjoyed other Coen brothers films after rewatches. So I'm like, okay, maybe if I were to watch it again, I would enjoy it more. And my verdict is I kind of do. I kind of enjoy it a little bit more. I still think it can get boring at times. I think it's a decent movie, but still nowhere near one of my favorite comedies ever. And here's the thing, I would say I enjoyed it a little bit more because I think that the performances came off a lot funnier this time around. Peter Sellers is understandably awesome in this movie, and General Ripper is also hilarious too. And it's a more nuanced humor style that maybe I just don't get. Maybe it isn't that nuanced, and maybe you're just like, okay, Preston, you need to review your history. And maybe you're right. It has both times I watched Doctor Strangelove, it had been years since my last history class that at least covered American history and specifically the Cold War and all those tensions. So, and I do like the movie a little bit more because I enjoyed the cast a bit more this time around. But once again, the source material just I just don't get it. You know what I mean? I just don't get it. You can call me a dumb movie enjoyer, but I just didn't really get this movie still. I still like it a little bit more, but like I said, as far as comedies, as far as satire movies go, Doctor Strangelove is not going to be up there. You know what I mean? And I can respect Stanley Kubrick for being one of the greatest and most influential to ever do it and to have such a varied filmography in which he approaches each film in a different way. Well, I can appreciate that. I can't call myself the biggest fan of him, to be honest. And, I'm going to get a lot of flack for that. But once again, I can enjoy a little bit more. I came to this movie with an open mind after considering it initially very boring the first time. I wanted to enjoy it more. I kind of do. And maybe it's not to the extent as other fans, but I at least gave myself that opportunity to be open. So there you have it. So, fifth up, we have a film that I previewed in my last video that I want to try to rewatch, and that was Rear Window. And in that video, the previous video, I talked about how I initially thought that while it was very compelling, the narrative was very compelling, I thought that it was fluffed up by scenes where characters would just wine swirl too much. That's how I described it, in which, you know, there'd just be multiple scenes where characters would just talk about the wine that they were drinking. And I'm just like, oh, get back to the story. I want to spy on the neighbors again. And here's the thing: upon rewatching Rear Window, I love this movie now. This movie is great. I continue to appreciate the excellent cinematography, the great blocking, the framing, the set design. And here's the thing: it's interesting how memory works because in the video, my previous video, I talked about how I remember being pretty bored about the scenes of wine swirling. Here's the thing: when I rewatched that video, those scenes, they're really just one scene. There's really one scene where characters are really drinking wine and talking about it. I don't think they even talked about wine at all, and that scene wasn't really that long. When I rewatched Rear Window, the entirety of the runtime was far less boring. There's noticeably a lot less space in scenes. And it's just an interesting how memory works, where you think a movie went one way, and when you rewatch it, it's actually slightly different, in which I there really wasn't as much space. And also going back to those scenes, it's the charm of the movie. It's the charm of Jimmy's character, in which he's not really focused on his current present dilemmas, such as marrying his partner, his settling down with his partner. He's not really focused on that immediate thing. And yet he's so hyper fixated on what's going on across the street and just overthinking the most simplest of gestures and interactions. That's the charm of the movie. And that's something I didn't get the first time because I had different expectations. I thought I was going to be so gripped by the narrative. It was going to be this super intense thriller story. And while it is, those scenes in between, that's what makes Jimmy's obsession with this potential murder case that's happening across the street. That's what makes it a lot more interesting to him because he's so focused on that. Yet he's not dealing with the current dilemmas of his current girlfriend or his job. That's the charm of the movie. That's the charm of Rear Window, and you just don't get that the first time around. When you rewatch it and you know what goes on in the movie and you know what happens, you can appreciate everything, and that's what I got out of Rear Window. I fucking love this movie now. I still love Rope by Alfred Hitchcock a little bit more. This movie, surprisingly, isn't even my favorite James Stewart Alfred Hitchcock movie, but it's still a damn great one. I still love it now. And I'm glad that I rewatched it, and I went in with that expectation, and I was glad that was open. So yeah, Rear Window, love this movie now. Next up, I think, is the last movie I prefaced on the video, maybe the second to last. It's Paprika by Satoshi Kon. Um, as far as Perfect Blue and Tokyo Godfathers, those movies have aged to become some of my favorite anime movies of all time. But Paprika, sadly, was not. And it seemed right up my alley because it's about dreams. I enjoy writing down my dreams. I talked a little bit about this in the Christopher Nolan video. But I just felt like Paprika was a type of film for me. And when I first watched it, I thought it was pretty boring. That's pretty much it. I found it imaginative and creative, but boring. And when I rewatched it, maybe I thought it could be a similar thing to like Inception, where, okay, yeah, the point of the movie is to rewatch it. You get more out of it when you rewatch the film. What did I get out of Paprika? I sadly got the same experience. And here's the thing: I'll be brief about Paprika. My experience with rewatching Paprika was pretty much the same with Tenet, in which I enjoyed the creativeness more, but the substance less. When I rewatched Paprika, I enjoyed the dream set pieces a lot more. I enjoyed Satoshi Kon's imagination and his creativity with how these dream set pieces are structured. But the story, I do not care. I found that I still don't care about it. I think the characters are emotionally distant. The story is very vague. It's very complex. The only character that's really interesting is the main character. That's really it. You know, not to compare to Inception. The comparison to Paprika Inception happens a lot. As someone who's seen both movies now multiple times, they're definitely different movies, but the comparisons are there. Within, but anyways, to kind of put a parallel with Inception, you know, the heart of the film is Leo's character and kind of his past, and why he is so careful about how he approaches this job that he has with the dreams. That anchor is much more interesting than whatever's going on in Paprika. There really isn't much of an anchor at all to the characters. And as a result, I can't really care about the story. I can just enjoy the visuals on screen. Paprika, same experience. I think it's a good movie, but not really great. As far as my preferred Satoshi Kon films, it's going to be Perfect Blue and Tokyo Godfathers by a landslide. So yeah, equal reception, not much, but once again, I tried to come out with an open mind, and yeah, win some, you lose some. Next up is none other than a Coen's brother movie, which is Oh Brother Where Art Thou. I I'd said before that, you know, The Big Lebowski was a film that I liked more after rewatches. And here's the thing with Oh Brother Where Art Thou. Oh Brother Art Thou, I thought was better than Coen brother films that I thought were misses, like A Serious Man or True Grit. But I also still didn't like them much as Inside Llewyn Davis or Burn After Reading, which were instant loves. But Oh Brother Art Thou was kind of the interesting in between. And so I thought, okay, this might be another Coen Brothers film that I can enjoy more when rewatching. And yeah, I love this movie now. When I rewatched it instantly, I just instantly loved it more. And I don't know why. I don't know why I didn't love it as much when I first watched it. I think it's just expectations. I think expectations is a big thing and standards. So, you know, regardless if Oh Brother Art Thou was bad. It wasn't bad. I thought it was a good movie. I just didn't love it. Like Inside Llewyn Davis or Burn After Reading. I thought it was a good movie. And then after watching Oh Brother Where Art Thou, the time period since then, before I rewatched it, I had watched about a couple dozen other comedies with, you know, varying levels of enjoyment. And then when you go back to Oh Brother Where Art Thou, I realize just how unique, or excuse me, I'm reminded how unique and hilarious the Coen Brothers are compared to all the other comedy movies I've watched since watching Oh Brother Art Thou for the first time. Oh Brother Art Thou is above the rest, and you sometimes don't get that when you watch a film for the first time. You get that with rewatches. I would describe Oh Brother Art Thou as the chaotic Southern uncle of the Coen's filmography. You know, it's kind of like that Southern uncle that you may or may not have, in which you don't see him often. You might forget that you have an uncle from the South, but every time you do see him again, and he just opens his mouth, and it's just absolutely crazy, you realize just how crazy he is. You know, I love the cinematography in this film. I love the humor. The quotes and the dialogue just hit a lot better this time. You know, like in the beginning when George Clooney's like, "Damn, we're in a tight spot," you know, and he just says that multiple times. That's very funny. Oh my goodness, what was his name? Delmar. Delmar was his name. Delmar's hilarious in this fucking movie. You know, it's like, care for some gopher, Everett? Everett? You know, it's like, we thought you was a toad. You know, you don't really get that. You don't. I didn't really realize just how unique and funny this movie is until rewatches, and that's how I have to say it. Your standards change. Your standards change the more you watch movies, and so Oh Brother Art Thou is now, you know, broken to my top 100. Love this movie now, and you just sometimes when you watch films and you're let down by them, sometimes all it takes is watching other films and just your standards changing over time the more you watch. And then you go back and watch other films, they may surprise you. So yeah, Oh Brother Art Thou, love this movie now. Next up is Tokyo Story, directed by the legendary Yasujiro Ozu. So when you start your film loving journey and you try to appreciate international movies, foreign movies, and just the greatest of all times in that sense, your Federico Fellini's, your Ingmar Bergman's, for example, your Akira Kurosawa's. You might also hear about Yasujiro Ozu. And so when I saw this movie, I thought it was pretty boring. It was good, but pretty boring. I was just like, wow, this movie really is up there for one of the greatest of all time. That was my initial thoughts. And when I rewatched it, I like it a little bit more. I'm not gonna lie, it's not an entire tier above my first watch. I still don't think this is one of my favorite. I guess I wouldn't say coming of age dramas, but just dramas of all time. But I like it more the second time around. And here's the thing: I initially thought Tokyo Story was pretty boring, was because it was very simple. It was very simple on paper, super simple story. And here's the thing: with Yasujiro Ozu's lens, I think the charm of this movie is that while it is a bit more simple, it feels more pure as a result for its storytelling. It feels more pure. The emotional moments hit harder because rather than when you're watching this movie for the first time and you're just seeing some very standard, simple scenes of family and interaction and conversation, the emotional moments hit harder because in the first movie where you just see, okay, it's just a simple Tokyo story, now you watch this movie whole lens. And I'm not going to go into details about this movie, but the movie is about life and death and what you make of your time, of your limited time on Earth. And so when you watch this movie for the second time, it's a little bit more heartfelt because now you're watching this movie in a lens that these characters have limited time. We all have limited time. And when you look at it through that lens, yeah, the emotional moments hit a little bit harder this time around. What was once seen as what I once saw as like boring and simple themes of making use of the present with the people you love before death. I found this movie a lot more contemplative and reflective the second time around. And it's a better watch for sure, but not that much better, to be honest. But once again, it's something that you I probably wouldn't have discovered if I didn't rewatch this movie. I probably would have told everybody that, yeah, Tokyo Story is overrated. It's too simple, it's not really that an interesting story. And then now I could come with a new explanation of this movie that it's like, hey, it's simple, but it's pure. It's reflective. It's contemplative. It's a little bit existential. And watch it with that lens. Watch it with those expectations. You might enjoy a little bit better. So yeah, Tokyo Story, pretty good. Next up is The Killer, directed by John Woo. As a huge fan of Hardboiled, I was a little disappointed that I didn't enjoy The Killer that much, and I found its action set pieces extremely entertaining, but I found the story mostly boring. Even though the Killer is so similar. Well, not so similar. It's similar to Hardboiled in the sense that it's two main characters kind of coming together and learn to work together with great action, but they're different movies. And so I'm just like, okay, I loved Hardboiled. Let's see if I can enjoy The Killer the second time around after finding it initially boring. And I'm sad to say that it was the same experience with the first watch than it was the second watch. And it's interesting how memory works. Kind of like I said with Rear Window, how I thought I remember the movie to be more boring than it was, and then when rewatching it, I'm like, oh no, it was not nearly as boring the second time around. The scenes that I thought were boring were fewer and less in between. When I rewatched The Killer, it was exactly how I remembered it, and that was when the two main characters aren't interacting with each other, I could not really be invested in the narrative at all. The first time you see these characters cross paths is by the end of the first half of the movie. And while the climax in the movie, without going to spoilers, while the finale of the movie is still gut wrenching and heartfelt, I just felt like the payoff wasn't as high as it could have been because I'm pretty bored in between. Like I said, our main characters don't interact that much. And because of that, I couldn't really buy into their camaraderie by the end of the movie. With Hardboiled, I can. With The Killer, I sadly could not. And once again, I tried to come out of this movie with an open mind and just be like, okay, this movie isn't as much about the action; it's about the camaraderie. I'm disappointed to say that, yeah, I think it missed with forming that bond and making it very convincing. And I don't want to compare it to the Hardboiled, but Hardboiled definitely did it better. And so, yes, The Killer, just sadly, unfortunately, same experience. I think it's a good movie. Once again, the ending is just very impactful emotionally. I just think it could have been better, and it did not improve after rewatch. Okay, so there you have it. So last but not least, Incendies by Denis Villeneuve. Not really any setup there. Denis Villeneuve is one of my all-time favorite directors. I just think he's so consistent and so amazing. Incendies, which happens to be one of his most acclaimed movies, especially on Letterboxd, I thought it was really boring the first time I watched it. I thought it was pretty boring outside of a few emotional bursts throughout the narrative, as well as the ending, which once again I'm not going to go into, but for obvious reasons, for those who have seen Incendies, know that that ending is just crazy. And so, what I initially thought about the movie was boring with a good ending. I thought, okay, now that I know what happens in the ending, I can go ahead and watch this movie now and see the setup, kind of watch the foreshadowing, and kind of watch this story get untold, and maybe like it a little bit more the second time around. And I did. I did like it more the second time around. Not to, I didn't enjoy this movie. It's not a change to the same extent as a film like Rear Window or Oh Brother Art Thou, but still a better one. And to just keep it brief, when you watch Incendies for the first time, or at least how I watched it, I thought it was, like I said, it was pretty boring up until the ending, in which the ending just hits you like a truck. And then when you rewatch Incendies, it's kind of one of those cases where knowing the ending of a film doesn't negatively affect your watching the movie. Because now when I watch this film for the second time, my entire experience, the entire runtime of this film, became a lot more intense. Because in my heart, in my head, I just have this existential dread towards the eventual reveal of the ending. And Denis Villeneuve is amazing at foreshadowing. He's done better in other movies, but you definitely, I would say foreshadowing, he just places the way that he structures the scenes. And he's just like, hey, the reveal of the ending, it's been relevant the entire time. You know, it's been relevant this entire time. And so when you watch it, you're just like, oh, 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 oh. And as the minutes tick by to the eventual reveal, you're just already affected. And so once I'm being very vague because I don't want to spoil it. If you want to, if you're curious about the ending of this movie, go watch Insomnies for yourself. But it was better the second time around. I am a fan of this movie now, and Denis Villeneuve is one of the best. I think, you know, Insomnies is not one of his best films, but I think across his filmography, I think now I enjoy it a little bit more. So what does this mean? So those are our 10 movies. What does this mean? Is that you can enjoy movies after rewatches. I think that sometimes it depends on your expectations too, and just how open you're willing to be. You know, for example, with a film like Oh Brother Art Thou, one, I'm a huge Coen Brothers fan, and two, this experience has happened before with The Big Lebowski. I was more open to enjoying Oh Brother Art Thou more the second time around. But then, say, take Doctor Strangelove. I like the movie a bit more. I don't love it. And yeah, there's some bias coming in there in which I've never really loved a single Stanley Kubrick movie. I like some of his films, but I don't love them all. And he's never really been a director that, while I do respect, I'm not really super interested in watching his filmography for. And so as a result, maybe I wouldn't enjoy Doctor Strange the second time around. A lot of it does come to bias and you know expectations and openness. And it does vary, and some films I don't give much more openness than others, and that's just because I'm simply a fan. It's all subjective. What we like and we don't like is subjective. What we're going to be more interested in rewatching is going to vary depending on the film, the director, the creator, and such like that. But all in all, I think this whole experiment was very fun. It, you know, wasn't a waste of time, even if I didn't enjoy every single film more upon rewatch. But I think when you love the art form enough, I think you should try giving it a chance. And I'm glad I gave all these 10 films a chance. Glad I gave them all a position in this race. And I'm glad to say that, yeah, this was a waste of time and I learned a bit about myself. So, yes, thank you for watching this video. A very long one, but one that I think was worthy really talking about. Go ahead and comment down below all your favorite movies. What are your favorite movies that you liked more after rewatch? What are your favorite movies that you didn't like at first, but then came around to the end? I'm really curious to see. Tell me the reason why you like these films more and all that. So yes, go ahead and comment and all that good jazz. And yes, thank you all for watching once again for another very long video. Thank you once more, and I'll catch you later.